some patterning that relates to chaos, conflict, and kingdom. I want you to just pick up on some general patterns here, and then we'll move to a few more specifics. Again, just so, I wanted to throw this in so that you again start, when you start thinking about the Bible, even when you're in the midst of reading it at one place, it's very handy and I think very useful to always have the big picture template in your head. And you can start picking up on ideas that are threaded, put down, picked up, put down, picked up, all the way through in a variety of ways. So here you have a state or circumstance will require God's intervention. Again, this is just a general pattern. So you have something that God must do, and then you have a conflict or some rebellion. There's a resistance to God's order. Again, this is like a cycle that's going to be repeated. Then you have an outcome. God restores things to the way He wants them. And then God's desired order or will proceeds amid the context of free will beings, either humans or non-humans. So this cycle, God needs to act. There's resistance, there's restoration, and then there's divine rule reestablished. You're going to see those ideas just tumble along in a lot of places. And as the biblical story moves, through your Genesis 1 through 11, then you get Abraham, you get the patriarchs, you get Israel, you get Sinai, you get all this stuff. And these things are going to be, evident you're going to be in any one of these at any given time, and it sort of lets you know what to expect that's coming. It's all moving toward, again, the final consummation of all these things. So for example, in Genesis 1 and 2, we have material. It's formless and empty. It needs ordering. You have a disordered, chaotic state, things as they are. God acts to bring order out of disorder. The results are, God says, I like that, it's very good. It's not Eden, it's very good. But it's still untamed and unpredictable, because I want you to learn about me from it. Okay. Genesis 2, we have a habitable world now at the close of Genesis 1. It's ready for human habitation. So in terms of the eschaton, eventually this will become globally Edenic, and eventually there will be divine rule on earth with humans, globally. That's the goal. So here's the pattern, here's how it's worked out in these two chapters, and ultimately this is the goal. Genesis 3. Eden, home to both gods and humans, and free will beings. There's a potential for problems there. You have rebellion, the Nakash rebels, tempts humans to rebel. Innocence and immortality is lost. Curses, forgiveness, humans are removed. In God's judgment, heaven is no longer on earth, and the domain of the Nakash is the underworld. He is Lord of the dead. Genesis 3, you have a promise of eventual restored Edenic rule. This is again the seed promise. The whole, I'll put enmity between your seed, the seed of the Nakash, and the seed of the woman, and that'll eventually, again, work itself out. There will be someone who's human. Eventually, someone from Eve will restore Edenic rule on earth. But right now, God and humans are in separate domains. There needs to be a reuniting of heaven and earth. And that's going to ultimately come through this seed. So, again, here you have the pattern. A lot of these are repetitious from the other ones, and eventually there will be no temptation, immortality, a new Eden, and again, divine human rule, symbiotic rule. Genesis 4 through 9. Humans are free. There's no direct divine presence, which means there is a potential for a problem. And we get plenty of problems in here. We have human sin, wickedness, proliferates, transgression of the heaven and earth boundary, Genesis 6 incident. The outcome, sons of God are imprisoned on earth in the abyss, and it's cast as being in the underworld in ancient cosmology. Genesis 9, there's a promise of a new beginning, an Adamic covenant. It's repeated, the covenant to be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth. It's repeated so as to fulfill God's will or human hegemony on earth as a step toward ultimate restoration of divine rule. You got to start somewhere, so after the flood, God tells Noah, be fruitful and multiply. It's deliberate. It's supposed to sound like what he told Adam. We're going to start over. We're going to try to restore godly, divine rule, God's will for the way the earth is supposed to be ruled. We're going to start with you now, Noah. So go out, get it done, be fruitful, multiply. And eventually humanity doesn't do that. No surprise there. Genesis 10 to 12, human freedom again. Again, no direct divine presence, so they pretty much do what they want. Humanity refuses to disperse. We will be as gods. I have ziggurat here because the story of Babel is set in Babylon, Mesopotamia. And everyone across the board, and I'm no different here, would argue that the Tower of Babel was what is called a ziggurat. Anybody know what a ziggurat is? What it looks like? It's pyramidal, but it's stepped. In Babylonian theology, the ziggurat was the place where heaven intersected earth. It was a temple. This is what you used it for. This is where the gods met humans. And so when you built one of these, you're trying to localize a deity. You're trying to call it down to do your bidding. It's a place to congregate as well. All these things, when the people are going around building these things in ancient Mesopotamia, it was a place for the city's favorite deity to live. Because you want to have it here so that you can barter with it. Keep it happy so that the crops grow and my cows don't die and all this kind of stuff. But the whole logic of temple building, and even more so the logic of idolatry, was so that you as a human being could do something to either initiate and or keep steady the relationship between you and the deity. It's not to say that you're really in control, but it's the attitude that I'm getting at here. Why does God forbid the use of an image for himself? Because God understands the logic of idolatry. You make that idol, so you're thinking, I'm going to inhabit it, so that you can sort of control the relationship a little bit.
Manipulate?
Yeah. We're not doing that. I'm not going to be tamed, is the message. Not only am I not like anything in heaven or earth, I'm not going to be tamed. The lesson should be loud and clear. Okay, you want to contact me, I will tell you how it's done. In fact, you go to this guy who's called the high priest, or Moses or whoever it is. When I feel like speaking, I'll show up. He'll see the cloud. He'll come over to the tent, and we'll have a conversation. It's completely opposite of what you'd expect anywhere else. But again, there's intent behind all. It's telegraphing certain ideas. So again, we have the nations divided, as we just saw, and then God calls Abraham, again, instituting, reordering things, trying to inch the thing forward. The goal, again, divine rule on earth with humans, reclaiming the nations, so on and so forth. Now from Genesis 13, I skip for the sake of time all the way to Numbers 10:10, because most of this time they are at Sinai. So I've essentially combined the patriarchal period with the period at Sinai. So the circumstances that require God to act, God needs to step in and fix the mess. The patriarchs are imperiled and at times disobedient. Abraham goes to Egypt, he lies about Sarah and all this kind of stuff. Well, Abraham's kind of important because it's through him that Isaac will come, and there's that like Genesis 3:15 thing going on, that we have the seed of the woman. So, God guards him. Exodus 1, Israel fails to return to Canaan. I mean, God tells Jacob it's okay to go down. Jacob asks him, when Joseph says, hey, come on down here, you got everything you need here. Jacob gets to the border, here we get cosmic geography again, he gets to the border of the land at the pillar sanctuary there that they set up, because he had met God there. They have a habit of doing things, planting trees, building little pillars, to mark places of divine encounter. Because if it happened once, it might happen again. So we'll stop there and see. And he asked God, am I doing the right thing? Because this is the land. This is the land you promised Abraham. God says, go ahead. It's okay to go down and see Joseph. Fine. He never says, go down and never come back. Go down and just sit there. The whole idea was to save them from the famine. But it's kind of nice down there. Land of Goshen. It's like one of the prime real estate. They don't come back. And so they wind up, becoming slaves in Egypt. God calls Moses. We have the whole plagues, the Exodus. And there are passages in the Old Testament that talk about how some of the plagues were directed against the gods of Egypt and so on and so forth. By the way, the Exodus, what's the key event in the Exodus? It's the control of
water,
the sea. It's just not a coincidence. I mean, the imagery is important. In fact, this is, if we went back to Psalm 74, we talked about the whole chaos dragon thing, this is why Psalm 74 links the creation with slaying the dragon, and why the dragon imagery is applied to the wilderness and the desert. Because in the writer's mind, both the creation and the deliverance of Israel right here were two separate but parallel acts of divine creation. One, the world is created, the other one, a nation is created. And in both instances, the forces of chaos and the gods associated with them must be subdued. Again, it's tracking, it's tracking the threads through the stories. Yes.
is that kind of maybe a reason why Jesus one of his first miracles was turning water into wine?
I think there are things like that where he has power over nature.
Calming the sea.
Calming the sea. He does. Not only does he calm it, he walks on it. He wipes his feet on the critter. I mean, it's the feeling you get. On my way over, I think I'll wipe my feet on you. What do you think of that? It's just that kind of thinking.
You think that was the real intent?
I think it's in the Old Testament, when you conquered someone, what was one of the symbols that you see?
Under the feet.
You put your foot on the neck. It was a symbol that I'm the winner. You're not. These acts have again symbolic value to the reader. It's a sign of mastery to step on someone. Kind of is today too.
And then water came out of his side when he was.
I think that just describes the death condition.
Oh.
That's to show he was dead. He really did die. And again, down here we finally get to Sinai. They get the law, they get the priesthood, the tabernacle, the ark. They're ready to go. Ready to go into the land, and we got the kingdom. Okay, we're finally going to get the thing started again. What happens? We go to Numbers 10 because Numbers 11, 12, and 13. What happens? This is a good quiz question here.
Is that the scouts?
Fun with the Book of Numbers. Yeah, it is.
The scouts.
Yeah, they camp at Kadesh Barnea, and Moses sends in the 12 spies. They come back, and 10 of them are like, man, they're really big. There's just no way. There's just no way we're going to do this. The whole rest of the story, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they actually go in And they're in different geographical regions, but they actually defeat the same people groups in different places, on the way to getting back to the land during the 40 years of wandering. And the whole point there is when they get back, they're at a different location to cross into the land. God deliberately has them go up through the Transjordan where these guys live. Wipe them out here, come back down, you camp where you're going to cross, the other side's Gilgal, where they're going to renew the covenant. Now, there's no reason to be afraid when you go into the land, is there? Because you just beat the guys over here. They're the same people. The very people you were afraid of 40 years ago, you just cleaned their clocks because I'm with you. Take the lesson. Go in. I don't want to hear any more talk about how scared they, how frightening they are. Big deal. Okay, go in, get the job done. You just did it here. As I'm with you over here, I will be with you over there. Again, the whole forced itinerary in the Transjordan is for a purpose. It gives them some, it should give them some confidence, and it does. And when we get to Exodus and the Sinai laws, again, you have Exodus with the sea, the chaos imagery, conflict with Egypt's gods. When they go through, after they get on the other side, the Song of Moses, Exodus 15:11, who is like you, Yahweh, among the gods? I mean, they just burst into that. You have holy war for the land, and it's versus divine and human forces of chaos and disorder. Exodus 15:3, Yahweh is called a man of war. And that man of war is this guy, the captain of the Lord's host, who is the angel of the Lord. How do we know that? Because he's described as having a drawn sword in his hand. A very rare phrase in the Old Testament occurs two other times. 1 Chronicles 20, and what's the other one? 1 Chronicles 20, and Numbers 22, with Balaam. They both describe the angel of the Lord. The phrase only occurs 3 times in the entire Old Testament. Here and those 2 other places. The other two, it's explicit. It's the angel of the Lord. So here we have Yahweh embodied, ready to go in to the land. We'll take care of it. So you have many odd laws, again, and a lot of the laws reinforce this Deuteronomy 32 worldview. We talked a little bit before about sacred space and holy ground, and the association of life and death and all this sort of thing. Again, it's designed to, just as Israel is Yahweh's territory among the known nations of the world, within Israel, there's special sacred spots. It's called the tabernacle sanctuary, the tent structure with the fence around there. And to reinforce this point, you had to watch where you walked. You had to watch, what you touched. You had to dispose of carcasses at a certain place because you couldn't put it on holy ground or there was big trouble. I mean, all these weird rules are designed to reinforce the idea that some places are common, some places aren't. Wherever Yahweh is special. He will have no connection with death. He will have no, you must pour out the blood before him because it's his. Sacrifice, this is why you shouldn't eat any blood, because it's mine. Again, all these little sort of odd, lessons. When you sacrificed an animal, you gave its life back to God. If you kept blood or ingested it, you were taking. You were taking part, the conception was you're taking part of that life for yourself. And you say, well, I just did it by accident. Hey, there were rules for that. They were even supposed to salt their meat heavily to draw out the blood. Because blood is a life force. Life and death belongs to God. It's just that simple. And again, all these weird rituals, these weird laws, they're designed to reinforce a fairly small set of ideas. They just manifest themselves in different ways in what they're doing. Leprosy. Leprosy was conceived of as as a manifestation of deterioration. Something was dying. You cannot come into sacred space because you're bringing death with you. We're going to quarantine you, you go through different procedures, hopefully you could be healed and all this kind of stuff. But you were not allowed to transgress these boundaries because it was designed again to teach, to associate Yahweh with life, not death, life. Even in sacrifice, you're giving a life back to God. Go ahead.
Is the B team, his enemies, the Elohim, are they associated with death? Like the opposite?
Yes. To an Israelite, they are, now in their own theology, they're doing what they're doing. If you sort of read through, ritual, there are lots of these rituals around for other nations and stuff like this. You don't see, this is like a significant difference. The logic isn't the same. You're feeding the deity. Okay, you're filling its gut, is what you're doing. You're giving it a good meal. It's not this, we're giving a life back to you because you're the source. The Israelite mentality is quite different. So in the native, whatever it is, Canaanites or whatever, they have a conception of what they're doing. It isn't the Israelite conception. And the Israelites look at them, because they're not Yahweh, as, you guys are all going to Sheol. You're like dead meat. I mean, you are, he is life, you're death. I mean, your domain is cursed. We go over there, we are no longer in Yahweh's domain, which again they associate with life and blessing and all these good things. So this is why, again, you have these certain restrictions. There's a whole set of ideas that accrue to them, and why violations are such a big deal. Even odd death penalty laws. Why is the woman who grabbed the testicles of a man, why is she under the threat of the death penalty? Because if he cannot have children, his name will die. His name is wiped out, from the planet. There will be no memory of him. He can't bring forth life. You took life from him. You are not allowed to take innocent life. So you have forfeited the right to live. We're going to give your life back to God. I mean, it's just a string of ideas that are associated with who is the one who has the authority over life and death. Again, a simple idea, but it just manifests itself in different ways. Again, you could just spend hours going through really weird Old Testament laws, and there's a logic to them. It's very foreign to us, but to them it made sense, because it fit somewhere, in a whole. Let's see here. Okay, Israel had to choose her path, and again, rejection of the law meant rejection of the distinction as the people of God. I mean, think of it that way. The law was a big deal because it is what distinguished you from everybody else. Now, the point is not that other nations didn't have similar laws. A lot of them did. But what was different about Israel is the laws that became the Mosaic Code were linked to a covenant relationship with Yahweh, which was in turn linked to the land. Okay, the other nations of the world might have laws about marriage and who you can't marry, and if you steal something you got to pay 10% back. And they might have similar laws, but you will not find in other ancient law codes the idea that these laws are given to you so that because you are in covenant with your God. They're just not structured that way. And so that becomes an important distinction, because this defined you as Yahweh's portion. And if you don't want it, you obviously don't want to be Yahweh's portion. You must want to belong to some other God. Goodbye.
So get out of the way.
Right. Get out of the land. The phrase cut off from his people. Sometimes in some contexts That is the death penalty, but a lot of it is banishment. You're no longer a member of the community. Go belong to somebody else. Exodus and Sinai laws, again, I don't want to spend too much time going through them, but again, you have, let's go back here. This point down here, since the law defines you as Yahweh's portion, obedience to the law is linked again to the Abrahamic promise of the land. And the centerpiece of this is the greatest commandment: thou shalt have no other gods before me. You shall love the Lord thy God, and so on and so forth. This is just ingrained in the Old Testament. What I want you to see especially, and this will be controversial to some, but it's just inescapable, and I want to show you that. The possession of the land is linked to two things: driving out the Canaanites and avoiding idolatry. They are both linked to the greatest commandment. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God, and no other gods before him, all that kind of stuff. Now, there is a supposition, and it's eschatologically relevant, that the covenants made with the patriarchs are unilateral and unconditional. In effect, Israel could do nothing to lose their covenant status and the covenant promises, which included the land. That is not true. It's easy to think of the covenants as unilateral and unconditional because of certain isolated passages about how the ceremony is conducted in Genesis 15 and whatnot. But I'm going to just show you. This is like everywhere in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 4:26 through 28. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today. You will soon utterly perish from the land you are going over the Jordan to possess. You will not live long in it, but will be utterly destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples. You will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you, and you will serve other gods there, the work of human hands. I mean, this is Deuteronomy. This is the second time they're going to go in and take the land, but he's telling them, okay, this is what's going to happen to you. And it does. It's sort of a foreshadowing of their failure to drive out the Canaanites. And ultimately, it leads to exile. This is a description of the exile. Deuteronomy 6, don't put the Lord your God to the test. You tested him at Massah. You shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, his testimony and his statutes, which he has commanded you. Down here, that you may go in and take possession of the good land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers, by thrusting out all your enemies before you. There's a link between loyalty to Yahweh and the land. Deuteronomy 7. Because you listen to these rules and keep and do them, the Lord your God will keep you with you the covenant. I mean, how much clearer could that be? You're loyal to me, I'll be loyal to you. The steadfast love that he swore to your fathers. He will love you, bless you, multiply you. By the way, that echoes the Abrahamic covenant. He will also bless the fruit of your womb, so on and so forth, in the land that he swore to your fathers to give you. Leviticus 26 is sort of the classic passage. If you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and do them, then I will give you your rains in their season, the land shall yield its increase, everything's going to be great. You shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land securely. But if you will not listen to me and will not do these commandments, if you spurn my statutes, if your soul abhors my rules, so that you will not do all my commandments but break my covenant, then I will do this to you. I will visit you with panic, waves, fever. I mean, there's long lists of these. You shall flee when none pursues you. I mean, you're just going to be ready to take off because you're just going to get pounded so much. I will destroy your high places and cut down your incense altars. Again, here's idolatry. I'll lay your cities waste, make your sanctuaries desolate. I will scatter you among the nations. Your land shall be a desolation. this is an interesting phrase, it becomes prophetically relevant. The land shall enjoy its Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate while you're in your enemy's land. Again, the land, obedience to Yahweh, loyalty to Yahweh as one's God was linked to possession and dwelling in the land. However, after failure, all of these passages also speak of repentance, forgiveness, and I'll remember my covenant. When you're in tribulation, all these things come upon you in the latter days. You will return to the Lord your God and obey his voice. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not leave or destroy you or forget the covenant with your fathers. Leviticus 26. If they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers and their treachery, walking contrary to me, so that I walked contrary to them and brought them into the land of their enemies, if then their uncircumcised heart is humbled and they make amends for their iniquity, I'll remember my covenant. Now, why did I bring that up? Because one of the big issues with eschatology, and we're going to go back to this theme, I'm going to take you through the covenantal passages. One of the big themes with eschatology is, we got this Deuteronomy 32 worldview. It's Israel against the nations. All the laws, all the sacrifices, all the rituals, are designed to identify you as Yahweh's portion, as his people. If you do not want that, that must mean you want someone else to be your God. If you are disloyal, if you violate the covenant by worshiping other gods, you notice there's not stuff like, if you steal something from your neighbor, I'm going to kick you out of here. No, it has to do with who your God is. And you demonstrate that by driving out, the enemies, because if you don't, what's going to happen? You're going to mingle with them, and you're going to fall victim to idolatry. You drive them out. I'm the only God that you worship. You remain loyal to me, and I will keep you in the land. They obviously didn't do that. Okay? And so they've got kicked out. We know all about the exile, but here's the eschatological question. When they're brought back after the exile, in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, that's obviously, in some respect, linked to the promises that God would remember his covenant. Now the key question is, wasn't there supposed to be a kingdom reestablished then? When they come back, does that look like a kingdom? Is it a kingdom? If it's a kingdom, where's the king? We're in the land. We don't really have all the land that we had before. In fact, it's not the land that God swore to give us. All these questions come up. So, what is the meaning of the return in relationship to the promises that God would remember his covenant? Is it possible that God would remember his covenant in a less than, I like to say, more than literal way? In other words, I'm bringing you back to the land. There's going to be a kingdom. There's going to be a king. The king's going to have subjects. But I'm going to do that in a way that you can't even imagine. In fact, I'm going to have to start poking other prophets like Isaiah, Zechariah, and Ezekiel that are more contemporary to you and give you a picture of what I intend. Yeah, it involves bringing you back to the land, but it's really big. Because you already know my ultimate goal is not to rule something the size of New Jersey. My ultimate goal is everything. And so what does that mean for kingdom prophecy? Does it mean that all of that is done in and through this circumcision neutral thing we call the church, which is in some sense, at least some sense, the kingdom, and it's global? Is there beyond that? We know that much for sure, that God did that, because the New Testament tells us that. The real question is there more than that? Is there a national future for Israel that's part of that? And that's really hard. That's a difficult question. On one level, it doesn't matter because you could more or less just say, if there is, God will get it done. Let's just focus on what we know the kingdom is now and how it operates and all this kind of stuff, and that we're part of it and enjoy that and work for the Lord and do all this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, we'd kind of like to know, because Paul and other writers hint, he laments about the status of Israel, even while he's running around preaching to the Gentiles. I wish I was accursed so that my brother, my countrymen would be part of this, and all this kind of stuff. And he starts using phrases like, all Israel will be saved. What does that mean? Does that mean all the people who really believe will be saved? In other words, should we filter that through Galatians 3? Because there, the true Israel is who? Those who believe. After Abraham, after the model of Abraham. We're going to go through all these passages. I'm just sort of prepping you. This is a big deal about how we're supposed to process this. And what I'm going to suggest to you is try to have in your mind that there's an ultimate plan here, and it involves reclaiming everything, and it involves, since it involves the nations, it needs to be terrestrial in some way, because we're going back to Eden. Eden was originally on earth. There's going to be this divine, human Edenic rule situation. That is God's goal. He is not going to work and fall short of that, because that is what he originally planned. And the question is, what does that look like? What does it mean? What form does that take? And so we're going to be exploring a lot of that, with New Testament stuff. But what time do we have? I guess I can check it here.
About 25 after 4.
Okay. Well, let's jump into the next one. We're making good time here. That was a short one. And the Old Testament, again, the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And this is sort of on the negative side. This is the bad turf. We talked about the good turf, we'll talk about the bad turf, because there are certain things associated with certain places in and about the promised land that are going to be picked up in the New Testament in some really specific and fairly dramatic ways. Now we looked at this, Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, and this whole idea of the nations being divided and Israel being Yahweh's portion. Let's take a look at Canaan. Since this is the focus, again, since this is the land God promised, and here are a list of passages that list the nations that are supposed to be driven out. Again, this is a sampling. If you looked all of them up, they're always grouped in 7. They're not always the same 7, but they're always grouped in 7. And I think the point of that is 7 always denotes completeness. So the driving out of the Canaanites needs to be total, needs to be full, not just like halfway or 3/4 of a job. You need to do the whole thing. If you actually count the separate nations, there are 12 people groups named in all. Isn't that a curious number? That's like one for every tribe. What a coincidence. Yeah, what a coincidence. Special points of cosmic geography we'll talk about. Again, the giant clans that are interspersed with people groups and cities under harem. So let's just jump in here. Let's talk about the giant clans. And I don't want to spend a great deal of time here, but here's sort of a nice little go-to list of passages that are important for this. These are the names. They're not all the names, like we have Zuzim here, elsewhere. But you have Anakim, Amim, and Zamzumim, the Rephaim, and the Amorites. We don't want to forget the Amorites. The Amorites are associated with the Rephaim. The Amorites are in Transjordan. This is Og of Bashan, Sion of Heshbon. Transjordan, I assume that you know what that term means. It means east of the Jordan. But Canaan proper is west of the Jordan. The Amorites here are under the control of some Rephaim remnants, and the Amorites elsewhere in Amos 2, 9, and 10 are described as unusually tall. And again, it's because of their association with the Rephaim. These guys are called Rephaim, and they're called Amorites as well. So that's why the Amorites are there. Now, if you look at a map here, this is difficult to see, but when you get the slides, you'll be able to check it. All of these in the, the uppercase letters are different people groups that are targeted, and you can see the distribution. The only thing I really want you to see here is the distribution. You've got Rephaim here. If I could change any one thing about this map, I would also put Rephaim up here near Lake Hula, because this is where Sion and Og had this territory as well. So you've got Rephaim here, you've got Zuzim, you've got Amim. Again, the Transjordan is populated. These people are scattered throughout. And over here you've got the more obvious ones, the Anakim. You have more Amorites down here. And these other names, Hivites, Jebusites, Perizzites, Canaanites is sort of an umbrella term, and the Girgashites, we don't know much about them, but they occur regularly in conjunction with the other giant clans. So they might be, nobody really knows, because there's nothing in the name except Jebusites might come from a Hebrew verb, yavas, which means to tread upon. And so there might be some imagery about they're so big they just kind of trample you. But there's nothing really concrete, yes.
Mike, show the Rephaim again where they located, because Neil didn't have the.
Okay, the Rephaim are labeled here, and if I could change anything about this map, I would also put Rephaim here. This is Dan, this is Mount Hermon, this is still territory of Bashan, this is Lake Hula, and you'll see this later. I have other graphics about this, but Og and Bashan controlled this territory too, so I wish the word was kind of moved up north a little bit, but it's not. You compare that to this is the extent of the conquest. So again, you can see what's obviously happening here. Bashan is again this territory right here. They never take all of it to Bashan. They take up to Ashtaroth and Edrei. These are the capital cities of the Amorites where Og and Bashan lived. Around here we get up north, and again down through the south here. So you could do a little imposition here. If you actually look at the places, and they're marked here with stars, major battles, and I would suggest even if you look up the instances where the verb karem is used, to devote to destruction. Karem is an important term. It was actually a ritual, sort of sacrificial term that when a city or a people group was put under karem, under the ban, to devote to destruction, anything devoted to destruction, by definition, was Yahweh's property. So that's why when they went into Ai, and Achan stole something, that city was under harem. You were not supposed to take anything out of it. The whole thing was to be devoted to Yahweh. In other words, you destroy it so that no human possesses any of it. You give that property, that life, back to God because He's claiming it. And again, it had this sacrificial feel to it. If you actually trace where that verb occurs, there's significant overlap between places that are, occur where there's a concentration of these clans. I don't think that's accidental. I think because they go in the first time and encounter them, they go in the second time and encounter them, and they're specifically named in several chapters that Joshua is supposed to target them. That the effort was to eliminate those bloodlines. They don't do it though. They fail at doing that. Yes.
such a concentration, like you said, size of New Jersey, were any of these giants or sons of God, were they influential outside of this area?
Not
In
out,
Egypt? or-
right. You will, there are really, there's one or two, I think maybe only one, reference to an Israelite killing a tall Egyptian, but there's nothing that labels the people like that. Outside this area, in literary terms, the stuff from Ugarit labels Ashtaroth and Edrei as sort of boundary markers for the underworld. And so, since in their belief system, the underworld was populated by Rephaim spirits, literarily, it shows up outside the Bible. You don't really get descriptions of giant clans or populations outside of the Old Testament. That said, unusual height was viewed as indicative of divine parentage. There's an Egyptian king, for instance, that's 6 feet 6 inches tall, and it's just assumed that he's the next guy who's going to be on the throne. You know, like the gods had something to do with that because he's different. There are a couple of Mesopotamian references. Gilgamesh, who's quasi-divine, is physically larger and more imposing than others. And there are some scattered references besides Gilgamesh as well. There was just an immediate association that you were different. You know, this marked you as sort of having some divine lineage or divine right, you know, to rule or something. But the problem is the texts we have are really, especially outside the Bible, they're stuff that is done about royalty for royalty. So we don't have any way of knowing if there was anything like this in a general population. There's just no indication of it. It's really Canaanite and Israelite that you get this kind of thing going on. Outside, it's just, again, associated with rulership.
You think given more time, they would have expanded their influence?
Oh, well, they do. I mean, when the Philistines settle, you know, they have the 5 cities of the Philistines here, and Tyre and Sidon up north. Philistines expand a little bit. I don't know if that really indicates anything. The region of Bashan and Mount Hermon is going to be important. You will see this picture again. This is Sea of Galilee, Lake Hula, and Mount Hermon up here. This whole sort of region, this was the tribe of, the half-tribe of Manasseh is awarded this territory. But again, they never completely succeed, as we know from the book of Judges and other passages. They never completely succeed in taking everything and driving everybody out they're supposed to. Again, Deuteronomy 1, Joshua 9, and we have Sion and Og associated with this area. The region of Bashan and Mount Hermon, this is the point, was a Rephaim stronghold. We will come back to this region in the New Testament. Because Sea of Galilee and Lake Hula, anybody know what is right at the foot of Mount Hermon? It's an important city in the New Testament. Because Jesus goes there and does some important things. Gadarenes are down here, like over in here. But he has to pass through that territory to get there. And, you know, again, that's where he drives out a demon and all that kind of stuff. Caesarea Philippi is located at the foot here. That's Peter's confession and the transfiguration. Okay, this is just a reference to the Ugaritic texts actually mention the Rephaim and Ashtaroth and Edrei. They also considered it the domain of the god MLK, MLKM, which is Milcom. It was a place of infant sacrifice in Canaanite religion in this region as well. It's the place where Jesus heals Jairus' daughter. I mean, just stuff like that. I mean, going to these places and doing these things. Localization again. This was Ashtaroth and Edrei were considered the gateway to the Canaanite hell, the Canaanite underworld, the place where the bad guys were, the Rephaim spirits. And later on in New Testament times, again we'll hit it tomorrow. This region, it becomes a cult center. The city of Dan, when the kingdom divides, becomes a Baal cult center, and that is eventually conquered by the Assyrians. When the northern kingdom gets wiped out, they destroy it. And then a mile or two away from that is where you get Caesarea Philippi built, and a place called Banyas, which is also known as Panias, which is the domain of Pan, which is where, again, the disciples are standing when they go to Caesarea Philippi with Peter's confession. So there's a lot of this cosmic geographical tracking that's going on, where Jesus is going to places where notorious things, demonically cosmic geographical things happen, and that had specific associations with this. And he does certain things there. It's very deliberate. He goes to these spots and says, the kingdom of God is here, throws out demons. You have other episodes, Peter's confession, the healing of Jairus' daughter. Again, it's a symbolic raising to life of the child, where the place where the child sacrifice occurred. It's just, I'm here, and I have control over these things. And this is just the beginning. Because when he goes through these places, eventually he takes this downward path, and where's he going? He's going to Jerusalem. What is he doing at Jerusalem? He's going to die. It's just the narrative. I mean, these things happen in succession. Bashan in Ugaritic, this is my Ugaritic database here, was pronounced Bathan by the Ugaritic people. It also means serpent or dragon. So this place had an association, again, with chaos. It's this chaotic, nasty. Again, the serpentine thing is really kind of telling, that they would associate this place with the underworld, the gates of hell. And again, it's very easy for the Israelites to, this is the wrong word, but to appreciate that. Because of their own texts, their own traditions, the Old Testament. Joshua 13, again, this is just a record of Joshua targeting the same groups. I put this up here because here we have the 5 cities of the Philistines. Again, the Philistines associated with the Rephaim. Of course, this is where what Goliath's tradition is. Goliath probably wasn't a native Philistine. He was probably a remnant of the Rephaim who lived with the Philistines, became one of their citizens. That's sort of the way he's described in certain instances. And down here, the kingdom of Og, who reigned in Ashtaroth and Edrei. So Joshua goes back to these places. He's specifically targeting people groups. Like I mentioned before, when Joshua takes over, when Moses dies, they go into the Transjordan, they deliberately go up, and they start targeting the people that they feared, that were the reason why they didn't go in the first place. And they take care of the Transjordan first, and then they're eventually going to cross in the middle, and that's when you get the Jericho incident. Now this is kind of interesting, and this is eschatologically relevant. Here are 2 passages that describe the parameters of the promised land. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river of Euphrates. This phrase, river of Egypt, is not in Hebrew the way the Nile gets described. This is actually a different river, sort of where Gaza is. I'll show it to you on a map. I will set your border from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines. Okay? That's the coast, the Mediterranean coast, all the way out from the Red Sea. From the wilderness to the Euphrates, for I will give the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. So we get an idea of the basic parameters here. If you look at this, and I'm going to muddy the waters here in a moment, the river of Egypt is down here, and we've got here tip of the Red Sea, go all the way up, and here's the Jordan going through. Got the Transjordan here. So the purple is the extent of Saul's kingdom. It's roughly, what Joshua had. The green is David's kingdom, and the yellow are the territories that were controlled by David, successfully controlled by David, and the red line, so this is the kingdom proper. David has outer territories that pay tribute to him. He has them under financial control. And the red line is the kingdom that Solomon inherits. Now you'll notice it goes from the river of Egypt to the river, the Mesopotamian river here, the Euphrates. So here's the question. Did Israel inherit the land? This is a question for eschatology because many will assume that there must be a literal millennial kingdom out there coming because Israel never inherited the land. And the land promise is still in effect, so we have to have a literal kingdom because of that. Now, I'll tell you right now, we could have a literal kingdom for other reasons. Okay? But the question is, a lot of people concentrate on this. And if you look at 1 Kings 4:21, Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. You could make a good argument that they did get the land and then sinned it away through apostasy. Now here's the problem. If you look at other lists, specifically in the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, they're different than these. Oh yes, there is a problem with descriptions of the promised land. There's like 3 sets of them. Okay? And they don't all agree. Some of them contain this strip right here, all the way up to Tyre and Sidon, the Phoenician cities, the coastal cities. So if you're going by that list, they didn't get it. And then you can make that argument. It's very difficult to know for sure. I'm pointing this out because people will bicker all day long about eschatology, about did the Jews inherit the land or not. Because on the one side, the dispensationalists will say, no, they didn't get it. And for the prophecy not to fail, they have to get it. That means Israel had to be restored in 1948. That means there's a future for national Israel. That means there has to be a new temple, and all these things that accrue to it. These are must conditions because of the Abrahamic covenant. And the Abrahamic covenant was unconditional. Israel couldn't sin it away because God said, I'm going to do that. And when they had the ceremony in Genesis 15, only God went through the animals. Well, I just showed you, an hour ago, passages that specifically link the land to obedience to the great commandments and specifically describe the exile as happening in response to disobedience there. And we all know that Israel just did a terrible job at doing that. They went into exile. So how do we process that? And then when you bring in the fact that, if we're going by those other boundary lists, they never got it. And some will say, well, these are the ones that count. These are the ones that are important. The amillennialists will say, they inherited everything, and so we don't need to worry about national Israel. Who cares what happens to Israel? You know, Israel got their land, they send it away, and the church inherits everything else from the Abrahamic covenant. So who gives a rip? I don't need to worry about Zion. I don't need to worry about being pro-Israel. Israel politically is a non-entity. Who cares? So this is why you have Christians divided on this issue. It gets down to things like, which boundary list do I choose? Do I elevate the covenant ceremony above all those passages in Deuteronomy and Leviticus? Okay, and does it count that this land's just under tribute? I mean, come on. There's no way that you and I are going to be able to get complete clarity on things like that, because the text is not clear. It just isn't. So I don't want to hear from the amillennialists that say it's a done deal. Doesn't look done to me if I go by those descriptions of the land. And I don't want to hear from the dispensationalists that say, you know, the covenants are what they are, and this must happen out there. Neither side, okay, is immune to significant criticism. I would suggest thinking about prophecy in a bit of a different way. One that doesn't really tie you to stuff like this. That you'd have to be omniscient to know. So, again, back to this, I showed you this before. I'll jump ahead here. Numbers 10 to Joshua 1, you have a failure. 40 years of wandering. I'm going to skip that one and go from Joshua 1:1 to Solomon. Here's your pattern again. Israel's poised for the second time to conquer the land. God's help, will accompany obedience. They get opposed by the Canaanites. The outcome is they never quite do the job. So there's centuries of struggle, cycle of disobedience, judgment, repentance, and all this stuff. It's only until David, you got to wait till David to get rid of what looks like the last of the giant clans with Goliath and his brothers. Unless you're going by the Septuagint, then they're around until the time of Jeremiah. Just thought I'd throw that in. And, David sort of completes the conquest. Does he or doesn't he? Back to the map. Maybe, maybe not. Davidic covenant to ensure enduring dynasty. Solomon, of course, is the successor. Land parameters of the covenant met, maybe, but the land boundaries are different. Kingdom established. Who really knows how clear of a picture you can get, because you've got these ambiguities in here. I would suggest, the goals are still the same. Maybe we should think about what the New Testament describes and try to go from there. It's just a suggestion. Because the New Testament does come down in certain places where you can say, this much we know for sure. And we hit that. And then we start thinking about what might be the case, in the church era, post-Christ, post-cross, probably a better way to say that. How many minutes? Do we have any minutes?
We have 10 minutes left.
10 minutes? Good. A couple slides here. Bashan. Bashan, as you noticed from the map, was in the north. So from the north, the word for north in Hebrew is Saphon. In Canaanite, it's Tsaphanu. Same consonants. A little close up here, again with Bashan, here are the two capital cities, Ashtaroth and Edrei. After Solomon, again the kingdom splits. We have a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. Southern kingdom, of course, you have the Davidic dynasty in the north. You got Jeroboam and a bunch of really awful kings. So after Solomon, a major apostate cult center is established at Dan, right here, city of Dan. And it becomes a stronghold of Baal worship. Now, we talked about this phrase, heights of the north. When this was used in Ugaritic, they were thinking, because the people of Ugarit live in ancient Syria, To the north for them meant like the mountains of Lebanon, way up there. Since Dan is located in the extreme north of the Israelite territory, and since Dan becomes a cult center for Baal, the northern regions, for this reason, the whole Bashan connection, Mount Hermon's up here, which according to Enoch, what happened at Mount Hermon?
The Nephilim descended.
The sons of God descended and hatched the plot, that was described in Genesis 6. This whole region just stinks, okay? It's just bad. And so there was a lot of sinister nuance attached to the north, this northern region. Out of that, or along with that, there's a theme in the Bible that scholars characterize as the foe from the north. Anything we really need to worry about just seems to come from the north. And it's both geographical north and religious north, the mythological north. It just seems like all the bad stuff just sort of comes from there. When we get into, again, some other prophetic stuff on the third day, this is partly why there was an association of Dan in terms of the great cosmic enemy who will finally, will assault Jerusalem for the final time. In Christian parlance, that person becomes known as the Antichrist. There were Jewish and Christian writers who believed that the Antichrist would come from Dan, either the city or the tribe or the region. Now, Dan's original tribal inheritance was way down here. If you look at a map, like in the study Bible, Dan's original tribal inheritance was down here. They failed to drive out the giant clans, so they did something unique to all the tribes. They migrated. They left. And they conquer a city in Judges 18, 19, 20. It used to be called Laish, and they named it Dan. So they move. They leave their inheritance. And they settle up here. And this city eventually becomes a center of Baal worship. There's a lot more to it. I'm just, again, prepping you a little bit. But there are some really odd things that go on with Dan. I don't know that the Dan Antichrist traditions are something to consider highly factual, but there's just some odd stuff going on that I'll show you. And I just want to let you know that there are some interesting lines of argument for that. Part of the reason why the bad things always seem to come from the north, I'll show you on Sunday that Babylon, right here's Babylon, right here, Israel. Babylon is called the enemy from the north. Like, didn't they know geography? Babylon's over here, it's the east. Why do you suppose they would think of Babylon as a foe from the north? Because all the roads go here and come down. This is the Fertile Crescent. Nobody crosses the desert, unless they're morons. Okay? The army of Babylon isn't led by morons, and it's not full of morons. They take the trade routes and come down. Everything hits Israel from the north. Everything. Ezekiel 38, Gog and Magog. You whip out a map of the Table of Nations. Guess where they're at? They're up here. They're in the north. That's why Ezekiel 38 says they come from the north, because that's where they are. And like everything bad must come from the north. Again, these are just trade routes. Right up here. You would take an army, you would follow a river. Why? We like to drink water. Okay, there's no refrigeration. Nobody's going to drop things out of the sky like in World War II for supplies. You follow the waterways, and you hit oases. Here's your Table of Nations. Magog, Gomer, Togarmah. They're all up north. This is not accidental. Because not only do we get hit by soldiers from the north, there was an inherent suspicion that cosmologically from the north is demonic territory. The human and the cosmic element are always working in tandem. Okay? It's just entrenched into their worldview. Bashan, mountain of God. Whoa, what in the world's that? This is Psalm 68, and I'll be hitting this a bit later as well. Psalm 68, the mountain of God, or Bashan is referred to as the mountain of God, because God wants it for his abode. This psalm is about God's conquest of the region of Bashan. Guess where this gets quoted? You ascended on high, leading a host of captives in your train, and receiving gifts among men. Now in the New Testament, the gifts are given, not received. The New Testament writer changes the wording. Okay, and there's a deliberate reason for it. Bashan is assaulted. Again, this is an eschatological psalm because the fulfillment down here has something to do with the New Testament. That's why Paul quotes it. Bashan is going to get assaulted. The chariots of God, God is going to take Bashan back. And the picture of leading captives, in a train, this is what you do with captives, you parade them. Who gets paraded in the New Testament with this language? Demonic forces, the forces of darkness. They're the ones whose butts are kicked. Does anybody know where this is quoted? In Ephesians 4.
I was going to say that.
Okay, we'll get there. Another Bashan verse. This is Psalm 68 continued. Let's just go back here. Ascended on high, host of captives, God will strike the heads of his enemies, the hairy crown of him who walks in his guilty ways. The Lord said, I will bring them back from Bashan. I will bring them back. What? From the depths of the sea. Well, I didn't see any sea up in Bashan. You don't need a sea in Bashan. The sea is the bad place. It's the place of chaos. Okay? You go down here, where does this come from?
Psalm 22.
Psalm 22. And what is significant about Psalm 22? Who quotes Psalm 22 and where?
Jesus on the cross.
Jesus on the cross. What in the world is Jesus talking about strong bulls of Bashan surrounding me? What are the bulls of Bashan?
What are they?
The darkness.
You worship Baal.
The Rephaim.
The bulls of Bashan, the bulls of Bashan are both it speaks of sacrifices to the powers of darkness, and also, I hate to use the word golden calf, but I'll use it since everybody's familiar with that from Exodus. Baal, the figure of Baal as a deity was a calf, or a bull. This is sort of a metaphorical reference, again, to the forces of darkness. Jesus is saying, I'm surrounded by the forces of darkness, by entities. Think of Aslan on the stone table, and you got it. All the hordes and everything, making fun of him and all this kind of stuff.
So this would be at the crucifixion,
It's quoted, yeah.
the B team, the enemy is rejoicing, thinking they're winning,
Yeah.
and this is all going to be turned
Yeah.
around.
It's all going to be turned around right there.
The
Okay?
deeper magic.
The deeper magic, yes. So again, in summary, Bashan, again, I just want to plant certain ideas in your head, because tomorrow when we hit New Testament, this is going to surface again. So we've got Bashan, the gates of hell, which is associated with Sheol, the realm of the dead. Who controls the realm of the dead? That's the serpent, because he's sent there. Okay, he's the Lord of the dead. He has claim on all human life because of the fall. Everyone's going to die. That changes. It changes with the work of Christ. He's the reason why the righteous, those who believe in him, are removed. They're not only just removed from death to life, They are removed from one realm to the other, from one master to the other. This is why Paul says in Galatians, are you nuts? Having begun in the Spirit, formerly you were under the powers of this and that, and now you've been delivered in Christ, you want to go back there. Are you nuts? Are you nuts? Because this is the kind of thing he's thinking about, this transference, from one kingdom to the next. Again, the whole thing with the Baal worship and the monarchy, eschatologically, there's going to be a reconquest of Bashan. The foe from the north idea is going to play out through the New Testament. You're going to see things happen in these regions that start the kingdom, that announce the kingdom and get it rolling. But these are going to also show up in the book of Revelation and other places when it comes to the final consummation, the final battle. These things are going to be tracked through certain passages there. And again, I mentioned the whole Dan Bashan tradition with Antichrist. A lot of the, again, we're going to spend some time tomorrow, I think that's it, we're going to spend some time tomorrow talking about the cryptic nature of prophecy. I don't know how many of you were in the room when I said some of the main points of doctrine that are critical for Christianity. Things like the idea that the Messiah was supposed to be God incarnate. You cannot find verses or prophecies that say that in the Old Testament. Even things like the virgin birth, if you go back and read Isaiah 7 in context, there's a reason why no Jewish writer, and I mean no Jewish writer, prior to the New Testament, and certainly beyond because they don't like the implications, no Jewish writer ever considered that Isaiah 7 had anything to do with the Messiah. No one quotes it as a messianic prophecy.
That's great.
And it's not just because the word Messiah doesn't appear in the passage. They don't even think about it. There are prophecies, like this that from the New Testament, the New Testament writers all of a sudden get clarity. There are reasons for that. You will not find verses. There is no grocery list of Old Testament prophecies for things as critical and fundamental as these major ideas. You don't even get the idea of a dying Messiah until the 8th century, the 700s BC. That's when Isaiah wrote. And it's Isaiah 53. And if there are reasons to think that Isaiah 53 might even be later, it might be as late as the 5th century. How in the world does this work? Why is it, we kick the disciples around all the time. We read through the Gospels, but these guys were dumb. Jesus will say something and it looks so obvious to us. And they're like, what? What? Huh? For real? No way. I mean, it's so easy to beat up on them. But they're in the dark because they don't have a grocery list. And I want to talk tomorrow about why that is. Why is prophecy cryptic? And I'm going to suggest to you, if it was cryptic the first time, it's going to be cryptic again. Yep. It's designed that way for a reason.